The sound of hoofbeats pounding behind her drowned out everything, except the desperate hammering of Victoria Vincent's heart as she urged her stolen mare across the New Mexico territory. The late afternoon sun of 1878 casting long shadows across the scrubland that seemed to reach for her like grasping fingers. She had been running for 3 days straight, barely stopping to let the horse rest, her body screaming with exhaustion and fear. The men following her were relentless, their leader a man named Maddox who claimed she had stolen from him, but the truth was far more sinister. Victoria had witnessed something she should not have seen, a murder in cold blood behind the saloon in Santa Rosa, and Maddox could not let her live to tell anyone what she had seen. The territorial law was too far away, and the local sheriff was in Maddox's pocket, leaving her with no choice but to run. The landscape changed as she rode, becoming more rugged, dotted with juniper and pinon trees. Her horse stumbled, exhausted, foam flecking its mouth. Victoria knew she could not push the animal much further without killing it. Behind her, the dust cloud marking her pursuer's position grew closer. There were at least 4 of them, maybe more, and they had fresher horses. Ahead she spotted what looked like fence posts, the beginning of someone's property. Hope flared in her chest. Where there was a fence, there would be a ranch, and where there was a ranch, there might be help. She urged her flagging horse toward the fence line, but the terrain grew rougher, studded with rocks and deep ruts from old water runoff. The mare stumbled again, this time throwing Victoria forward. She hit the ground hard, rolling, the breath knocked from her lungs. Gasping, she looked back and saw her horse limping away, unable to continue. Panic seized her as the sound of approaching riders grew louder. On foot, she had no chance. Victoria scrambled up and ran toward the fence, her split skirt tangled around her legs, her blouse torn and dusty. Behind her, she heard shouts. They had spotted her. She pushed herself harder, her boots sliding on loose stones, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The fence was made of barbed wire strung between rough wooden posts, newer than she had expected. Without thinking, she tried to push through between the wires, desperate to reach whatever lay beyond. Perhaps she could hide or find help. But in her panic and exhaustion, she misjudged the space. The barbed wire caught her clothing, then her skin, tearing into her sleeve and the flesh beneath. She cried out in pain but kept pushing, only to become more entangled. The wire wrapped around her arm, her shoulder, caught in her hair. The more she struggled, the deeper the barbs dug in. Blood began to seep through her torn sleeve. Behind her, the hoofbeats were almost upon her. She pulled frantically, feeling the wire cut deeper, tears of frustration and terror streaming down her face. "Well, well," a harsh voice called out, Maddox. "Looks like the little bird caught herself." Victoria twisted to look back, still struggling against the wire. 4 men sat on their horses about 50 yards away, riding slowly toward her now that she was trapped. Maddox was in front, a cruel smile on his weathered face. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders with a scar running down one cheek and cold eyes that held no mercy. "Please," Victoria called out, her voice cracking. "I will not say anything, just let me go." Maddox laughed, a sound without humor. "You think I can trust your word? You saw what you saw. Can't have you running to the territorial marshal now, can we?" The other men spread out slightly, blocking any possible escape route. Not that she could escape, trapped as she was in the fence. Victoria pulled harder against the wire, feeling it tear her skin, not caring about the pain. Better wounded than dead. "Stop struggling," Maddox said, dismounting. "You will just hurt yourself worse. Let us make this quick." He reached for the gun at his hip, and Victoria felt her heart stop. This was it. She was going to die here, caught in a fence like some animal. She closed her eyes, unable to watch, still pulling futilely at the wire. "That is far enough." The voice was deep, calm, and authoritative, coming from somewhere to Victoria's right. Her eyes flew open. All 5 men turned to look at the newcomer. He sat on a large bay horse, holding a rifle loosely but ready across his saddle. He was tall, even-seated, with broad shoulders and a lean build. A worn hat shadowed his face, but Victoria could see a strong jaw, sun-darkened skin, and eyes that were steady and hard as they regarded Maddox and his men. He wore simple rancher's clothes, a faded blue shirt and brown vest, leather chaps over his trousers, and well-used boots. Everything about him spoke of capability and quiet strength. "This does not concern you, friend," Maddox said, his hand still on his gun. "This woman is a thief. We are just retrieving what she took." "That's so," the rancher said, his voice carrying a note of skepticism. "She does not look like she is carrying much, and last I checked you were on my property. That fence you got her tangled in, that is mine." "We will be off your property soon enough," Maddox said. "Just as soon as we collect what is ours." The rancher shifted slightly in his saddle, and suddenly the rifle was pointed directly at Maddox. The movement was so smooth, so practiced, that it seemed to happen without effort. "I do not see her taking anything from you. I see a woman caught in my fence, bleeding. And I see 5 armed men threatening her on my land. Now, I am a reasonable man, but I take trespassing seriously, especially when it involves threatening unarmed women." "You do not know what you are getting into," Maddox warned, his voice hardening. "This is none of your business." "You made it my business when you rode onto my property," the rancher replied. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Now, I am going to ask you once politely. Ride off my land. Go back the way you came." One of Maddox's men, younger than the others with a nervous energy about him, started to reach for his gun. The rancher's rifle swung toward him so fast Victoria barely saw it move. "I would not do that, son. I can put 3 bullets in 3 of you before any of you clear leather. I have been shooting since before you were born." There was a long, tense moment. Victoria held her breath, still tangled in the fence, watching as Maddox calculated his odds. She could see the thoughts moving behind his eyes, the weighing of risks. Finally, he spat into the dust. "This is not over," he said to Victoria. "You hear me? This is not over. Off my land," the rancher repeated, his voice harder now. "Now." Maddox glared at him, then at Victoria, then wheeled his horse around. His men followed, casting backward glances. They rode off at a canter, back the way they had come, dust rising in their wake. The rancher did not lower his rifle until they had disappeared over a rise. Only then did he swing down from his horse, setting the rifle in its saddle scabbard. He turned to Victoria, and she got her first clear look at his face. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with weathered features that spoke of years in the sun and wind. His eyes were a striking gray-green, steady and assessing but not unkind. A few days' worth of stubble covered his jaw, and dark brown hair showed beneath his hat. "Let us get you out of there," he said, approaching carefully. "Hold still. The more you move, the worse it will be." He pulled a pair of wire cutters from his belt, the kind ranchers used for fence work. Up close, Victoria could smell leather and horse and sage, a clean scent despite the day's work. His hands were large and calloused as he began carefully cutting the wire that held her. "This will take a minute," he said quietly. "That wire is tangled good. What is your name?" "Victoria," she managed, her voice shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "Victoria Vincent." "Nathan Harper," he replied, concentrating on his work. "Hold your arm steady, Miss Vincent. This barb is deep." She tried to stay still, but she was trembling, the aftermath of fear and exhaustion catching up with her. Nathan worked methodically, cutting each strand of wire, carefully unwinding it from her clothes and hair. When he reached the barbs embedded in her arm, he paused. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "The barbs are hooked in. I need to push them through rather than pull them back." Victoria nodded, biting her lip. Nathan was quick and efficient, but tears still sprang to her eyes as he freed the barbs. Blood flowed more freely once they were out, and he immediately pulled a bandana from his pocket and pressed it against the wounds. "Hold that there," he instructed. "We need to get you to the house so I can clean and bandage this properly. Can you walk?" "I think so," Victoria said, though in truth she was not sure. Her legs felt like water. As if sensing this, Nathan steadied her with a hand on her elbow as she stepped away from the fence. She swayed and he caught her more firmly. "Easy now. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the morning before. I have been riding hard." Nathan's jaw tightened. He looked in the direction Maddox and his men had gone, then back at her. "Those men will be back." "Yes," Victoria said quietly, the fear rushing back. "Curtis Maddox does not give up. And he has reasons to want me dead." Nathan studied her face for a long moment. Whatever he saw there seemed to convince him. He nodded slowly. "Then we best get moving. My ranch house is about a mile from here. Can you ride double?" Victoria nodded. Nathan whistled and his bay horse trotted over. With surprising gentleness for such a large man, he lifted Victoria up into the saddle, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to hold the reins, steadying her against his chest. She was too tired to feel embarrassed by the proximity. Instead, she felt only relief at being held up, at not having to support her own weight for a few precious minutes. They rode at an easy pace, Nathan guiding the horse with practiced skill. The land around them was beautiful in the fading light, all gold and amber, the shadows growing long. Victoria could see cattle in the distance, grazing peacefully. The ranch seemed well kept, the fences in good repair. "You run this place alone?" she asked after a while, feeling she should say something. "Mostly," Nathan replied. "I have a hand who comes in to help with roundup and branding, but day to day, it is just me. Been that way for 5 years now." There was something in his tone that suggested a story, but Victoria did not press. She was a stranger, and he had already done more for her than she had any right to expect. She leaned back slightly against his solid warmth, feeling safer than she had in days. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a sturdy adobe structure, single-story but sprawling, with a covered porch across the front. Corrals and outbuildings surrounded it, everything neat and well-maintained. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting a banked fire inside. Nathan rode straight to the house and dismounted, then lifted Victoria down. Her legs buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he caught her smoothly, lifting her into his arms as though she weighed nothing. "I can walk," Victoria protested weakly. "Maybe," Nathan agreed, "but we will get there faster this way." He carried her up onto the porch and through the front door, kicking it shut behind them. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, furnished simply but well. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the furniture, though worn, was solid. Everything was clean, no dishes piled up, no dirt tracked across the floors. Nathan set Victoria down in a chair at a wooden table and immediately went to stoke up the fire. "I am going to heat some water," he said. "We need to clean those cuts properly. You hungry?" Victoria's stomach growled in answer, and Nathan's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I will take that as a yes. I have stew left from yesterday. It is not fancy, but it is hot and filling." He moved around the kitchen with the ease of long practice, setting a pot of water on the stove, ladling stew into a bowl. Within minutes, he placed food in front of Victoria, along with a chunk of bread and a cup of water. "Eat slowly," he advised. "If you have not eaten in days, you do not want to shock your system." Victoria tried to follow his advice, but the food was warm and good, and she was starving. She ate quickly, barely tasting it, just needing fuel. Nathan watched her for a moment, then turned to gather medical supplies from a cabinet. When Victoria finished eating, Nathan brought the pot of hot water to the table along with clean cloths, a bottle of whiskey and bandages. He pulled another chair close and reached for her injured arm. "May I?" She nodded, extending her arm. Nathan had removed his hat, and she could see his face clearly now in the lamplight. He had strong features, a straight nose that had been broken at least once, and those remarkable eyes that seemed to change color with the light. There were fine lines at the corners of his eyes, suggesting he smiled more than his current serious expression indicated. He rolled up her torn sleeve carefully, revealing the full extent of the damage. Deep scratches crisscrossed her forearm and upper arm, still bleeding sluggishly. Nathan frowned. "These need to be cleaned thoroughly. It is going to hurt." "I understand," Victoria said quietly. Nathan soaked a cloth in the hot water and began cleaning the wounds, his touch surprisingly gentle for such large hands. Victoria bit her lip against the pain but did not cry out. When the wounds were clean, Nathan reached for the whiskey. "This will hurt worse," he warned, then poured the alcohol over the cuts before she could brace herself. Victoria gasped, her free hand flying out to grip Nathan's forearm. The pain was sharp and fierce, like fire across her skin. She held on tight, her fingers digging into the solid muscle of his arm, and Nathan bore it without comment, holding her injured arm steady with his other hand. "Worst part is over," he said after a moment, his voice gentle. "You did good." He bound her arm with clean bandages, his movements practiced and sure. "You have done this before," Victoria observed, trying to distract herself from the lingering sting. "Ranching is not a gentle profession," Nathan replied. "I have patched myself up more times than I can count." Others too, when needed. When he finished, he sat back and studied her. "Now, you want to tell me why Curtis Maddox and his men want you dead?" Victoria looked down at her bandaged arm, gathering her thoughts. Could she trust this man? He had saved her life, but that did not mean he would believe her story, much less continue to help her. Still, she owed him the truth. "3 days ago, I was in Santa Rosa," she began slowly. "I work as a seamstress there, or I did. I had stayed late at the shop finishing a dress for Mrs. Henderson. It was after dark when I left. I was walking home, taking the alley behind the saloon because it is faster. That is when I saw them." She paused, the memory making her hands shake. Nathan waited silently, his attention focused completely on her. "Curtis Maddox and 2 of his men had another man cornered against the back wall of the saloon. I could not see the other man's face clearly, but I heard them arguing about money, about a debt. Then Maddox pulled his gun and shot him, just like that. No warning, no hesitation. The man fell and I—" She swallowed hard. "I must have made a sound. Maddox looked up and saw me." "Did you know the man who was killed?" Nathan asked. Victoria shook her head. "No, but I heard in town later that he was a drifter who had been working odd jobs. His name was Thomas something. The sheriff ruled it self-defense, said the man drew on Maddox first. But that is not what happened. I was there. I saw." "And you told people what you saw?" "I went to the sheriff first thing the next morning," Victoria said, "but Sheriff Coleman just looked at me like I was crazy. He said Curtis Maddox was a respected businessman, and how dare I accuse him of murder. He suggested I must have been mistaken, that it was dark, that I should forget what I thought I saw." Her voice hardened. "But I know what I saw. So I told him I would go to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe. That is when I knew I was in trouble. The sheriff told Maddox, Nathan said flatly. He must have. That same evening, 2 of Maddox's men tried to break into my boarding house room. I barely got out in time. I took a horse from the livery and ran. I have been running ever since. She looked up at Nathan, meeting his eyes. I know how it sounds. A woman claiming a prominent businessman is a murderer, but I swear to you it is the truth. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he nodded. I believe you. Relief flooded through Victoria so intensely that tears sprang to her eyes. You do? I know Curtis Maddox, Nathan said, his voice grim. Not well, but enough. He owns a freight business in Santa Rosa and he has a reputation. There have been rumors for years about his dealings, about people who cross him ending up dead or disappeared. Nothing proven, but enough smoke to suggest fire. And I saw how desperate he was to get to you. A man does not ride that hard after a thief. He was afraid of what you know. He stood and walked to the window, looking out into the gathering darkness. The question is, what do we do about it? Santa Fe is 4 days' ride from here, longer if the weather turns. Maddox knows you are headed that direction. He will have men watching the roads. I cannot ask you to get involved further, Victoria said quickly. You have already done so much. If you could just let me rest here tonight, I will be gone in the morning. Nathan turned from the window, his eyes sharp. And go where? On foot. Maddox will be back, probably with more men. And even if you could make it to Santa Fe, what then? It is your word against his, a seamstress against a businessman with connections. You have no proof. Victoria felt despair creeping in. He was right, of course. She had not thought past the immediate need to run to survive. What else can I do? I cannot just let him get away with murder. No, Nathan agreed. You cannot. He returned to the table, sitting down across from her. But rushing off without a plan will just get you killed. You need time to think, to figure out the right approach, and you need to heal. He gestured to her bandaged arm. You are exhausted and hurt. You will not make it far in that condition. I cannot stay here, Victoria protested. It will put you in danger. Maddox will come back, and when he does, I will be ready, Nathan said calmly. This is my land, Miss Vincent. I know every rock and tree, every ravine and hiding spot. Maddox and his men are city cowboys, comfortable in Santa Rosa but not out here in the open range. Out here, I have the advantage. Victoria stared at him, trying to understand. Why would you do this? You do not know me. This is not your fight. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was soft. 5 years ago, my wife was killed in a stagecoach robbery. The men who did it were never caught. Never even seriously pursued because the local law was lazy and corrupt. I know what it is like to see justice denied. I would not wish that on anyone. He focused on her again. And maybe it is not my fight, but I am making it my fight. You need help, and I am in a position to give it. That is enough. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a warmth spreading through the cold fear that had gripped her for days. Here was a man who had suffered his own loss, his own injustice, and instead of becoming bitter and closed off, he was still willing to help a stranger. It spoke to a strength of character that was rare. Thank you, she said softly, and meant it with her whole heart. Nathan nodded, then stood. You are welcome to stay as long as you need. Now you should rest. You look like you are about to fall over. He gestured to a door off the main room. That is the spare bedroom. It is not much, but the bed is clean and comfortable. I will be right out here if you need anything. Victoria rose on shaky legs. Mr. Harper, Nathan, he corrected gently. Nathan, she repeated. I do not know how I will ever repay you for this. Seeing you safe and that murderer brought to justice will be payment enough, he replied. Now go get some rest. Tomorrow we will figure out what to do next." Victoria went to the bedroom, finding it simple but comfortable as promised. A narrow bed with a colorful quilt, a washstand, a small dresser. She sank onto the bed, intending to just sit for a moment, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She barely managed to pull off her boots before she fell back onto the pillow and knew nothing more. She woke once in the night, disoriented and frightened, but then she heard the sound of movement in the other room, remembered where she was, and felt safe enough to fall back asleep. When she woke again, pale morning light was filtering through the window. Victoria sat up slowly, her body stiff and aching. Her arm throbbed where the barbed wire had cut her, but when she checked the bandage, there was no sign of infection. She could hear sounds from the kitchen, the smell of coffee and bacon making her stomach growl. She found her boots and pulled them on, then ventured out into the main room. Nathan was at the stove cooking breakfast. He had shaved since yesterday, and his hair was damp, suggesting he had already been up for hours. "Good morning," he said, glancing over at her. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Victoria admitted, "but better than yesterday, thank you." "Coffee is fresh," Nathan said, gesturing to the pot. "Food will be ready in a minute. I hope you like bacon and eggs." "I like anything that is not hardtack and water," Victoria said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. The first sip was heaven, strong and hot. They ate in comfortable silence, Victoria too hungry to make conversation and Nathan seeming content to let her eat in peace. When she had finished, she helped him clear the dishes, and they went out onto the porch. The morning was beautiful, the air cool and clean, the sky a clear, endless blue. Victoria could see cattle grazing in the distance, and beyond them, the rolling terrain stretched out toward mountains on the horizon. It was peaceful, the kind of place where a person could forget the world's troubles for a while. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. Nathan leaned against the porch railing, looking out over his land. "It is. That is why I stayed after." He trailed off, but Victoria understood. After his wife died, this place has a way of healing a person if you let it. They stood in silence for a while, just taking in the morning. Then Nathan straightened. "I need to check on the herd today, make sure they have not wandered too far. I also want to ride out and see if Maddox and his men are still in the area. You should stay here. The house is solid, and there is a rifle over the door if you need it." Victoria felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of him leaving, but she pushed it down. She could not be dependent on him for every moment. "All right. Is there anything I can do while you are gone?" Nathan considered. "If you are up to it, you could mend that fence where you got tangled. The wire cutters are in the barn, along with spare wire. But do not push yourself if your arm hurts too much." "I will be fine," Victoria said. "I want to help to earn my keep." "You do not need to earn anything," Nathan said firmly. "But if it makes you feel better, I will not stop you." He went inside and returned with his rifle, checking it carefully before heading to the corral where his horse waited, already saddled. Victoria watched him ride out, an unexpected pang of loneliness hitting her as he disappeared over a rise. She shook herself. This was ridiculous. She barely knew the man, but he made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in a long time, maybe ever. She spent the morning working on the fence, carefully splicing new wire where Nathan had cut it to free her. The work was familiar. Her father had been a farmer before he died, and she had helped with fence repairs many times. It felt good to be doing something useful, to be contributing. By midday, the fence was repaired and Victoria returned to the house. She was hot and sweaty, her arm aching but satisfied with her work. She washed up at the pump outside, then went inside to rest. Nathan returned in the late afternoon, riding in at a canter. Victoria, who had been dozing on the porch, sat up quickly at the sound of hoofbeats, her heart racing until she recognized him. He dismounted and tied his horse, then came up the porch steps. His expression was serious. "They are still in the area. I found their camp about 5 miles east on the other side of that ridge line. Looks like 6 men now, not 4. Maddox has called in reinforcements." Victoria felt fear clutch at her. 6 men. "Nathan, you cannot fight 6 men alone. Maybe I should just lead them away from here." "They would catch you before you made it a mile," Nathan said flatly. "And even if they did not, what then? You would be right back where you were 3 days ago, running and alone." "No." He shook his head firmly. "We need a different plan." "What kind of plan?" Nathan sat down on the porch step, thinking. "The way I see it, we have 2 choices. We can try to hold them off here and hope that someone official eventually comes along to help, but that could take weeks, and I doubt Maddox will wait that long. Or we can go on the offensive." "Offensive? What do you mean?" "I mean we find a way to prove what Maddox did. Get evidence that will stand up in a court of law. Then we take it directly to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe, make sure it gets in the right hands where Maddox's influence cannot reach." Victoria frowned. "But how?" "The only evidence is my testimony, and you said yourself that might not be enough." "Your testimony might not be enough alone," Nathan agreed. "But what if there were other witnesses? What if Maddox has done this before, and there are people who would testify against him if they knew they would be protected?" "It is possible," Victoria said slowly. "There were rumors in Santa Rosa, like you said, but people were too afraid to speak up. Then we need to find those people and convince them that they will be safe if they come forward. And we need to do it before Maddox figures out what we are doing." It was a dangerous plan, Victoria knew. Going back toward Santa Rosa, seeking out potential witnesses, all while Maddox and his men were hunting them. But what choice did they have? She could not hide on Nathan's ranch forever. "All right," she said. "Let us do it." Nathan looked at her approvingly. "You are braver than you think, Victoria Vincent." "I do not feel brave," she admitted. "I feel terrified." "Being brave is not about not feeling afraid," Nathan said. "It is about doing what needs to be done despite the fear." Over the next 2 days they prepared. Nathan taught Victoria to shoot properly, setting up targets behind the barn and walking her through the basics of handling a rifle. She was a quick learner, and by the end of the 2nd day, she could hit a target at 50 yards more often than not. "You have a steady hand," Nathan observed. "That is good. Steadiness matters more than speed in most situations." Victoria lowered the rifle, her shoulder aching from the recoil. "My father taught me to shoot when I was younger, but we only had an old shotgun. I have never used a rifle like this." "You are doing well," Nathan assured her. "I hope you will not need to use it, but it is better to know how." They also worked on a plan for approaching Santa Rosa. Nathan knew a few people in town, including the telegraph operator, a man named Gerald Murphy who had no love for Curtis Maddox. If anyone would help them, it would be Gerald. On the 3rd morning after Victoria's arrival, they rode out together just before dawn. Nathan had given Victoria proper riding clothes, trousers, and a shirt that had belonged to his wife, carefully preserved in a trunk. They fit reasonably well, and Victoria was grateful for the practicality. Riding in a split skirt was hard enough. Riding in a full dress would have been impossible. They took a circuitous route toward Santa Rosa, staying off the main trails. Nathan seemed to know every hidden path and game trail, guiding them through terrain that offered cover. They saw no sign of Maddox or his men, but Nathan remained vigilant, his rifle always close at hand. They reached the outskirts of Santa Rosa just after nightfall, approaching from the north side of town rather than the main road. Nathan led them to a small house on the edge of town, barely more than a shack, and dismounted. "Gerald lives here," he explained quietly. "He is a widower, no family. If anyone can be trusted, it is him." Nathan knocked softly on the door. After a moment, it opened a crack, and a thin man with graying hair peered out. His eyes widened when he saw Nathan. "Nathan Harper, what are you doing in town? And at this hour?" "I need your help, Gerald," Nathan said quietly. "Can we come in?" Gerald looked past Nathan to Victoria, his expression curious and a little wary, but he opened the door wider. "Come in, quickly. I do not want the neighbors seeing visitors at this hour. People talk." Inside, the house was small but tidy, lit by a single lamp. Gerald gestured them to a rough wooden table and chairs. "What is this about, Nathan?" Nathan glanced at Victoria, who took a breath and launched into her story. She told Gerald everything, from witnessing the murder to her desperate flight, to Nathan finding her caught in his fence. Gerald listened without interrupting, his expression growing more grave with each word. When she finished, Gerald sat back and whistled softly. "Curtis Maddox, a murderer. I cannot say I am surprised exactly, but having it confirmed is another matter, and you want to prove it." "We want to bring him to justice," Nathan said. "But Victoria's testimony alone might not be enough. We need more. Other witnesses, other evidence. You know this town better than anyone, Gerald. Has Maddox done anything like this before? Are there others who might testify against him if they knew they would be protected?" Gerald was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he nodded slowly. "There might be. About 2 years ago, a man named Robert Sutton disappeared. He had worked for Maddox's freight company but quit after some kind of disagreement. A week later, he was gone. Everyone assumed he had just moved on, but his sister, Emma, she always insisted something had happened to him. Said her brother would never have left without telling her." "Where is Emma now?" Victoria asked. "She still lives here, works as a cook at the boarding house. She has been trying for 2 years to get someone to investigate her brother's disappearance, but Sheriff Coleman refuses to do anything." "Anyone else?" Nathan pressed. "Maybe. There is a cowboy named Jack Reynolds who used to work for Maddox. He quit suddenly about 6 months ago and left town. But I heard through the telegraph that he is working on a ranch down near Albuquerque now. I could send a wire, see if he would be willing to talk." "Do it," Nathan said. "Tell him there might finally be a chance to bring Maddox to justice, but he needs to come back and testify. Tell him we will protect him." Gerald nodded. "I will send the wire first thing in the morning, but you two should not stay in town. If Maddox finds out you are here, there will be trouble." "We will camp outside town and come back tomorrow night," Nathan agreed. "Can we meet here again?" "Yes, I will have whatever information I can gather by then." They left the way they had come, slipping through the dark streets like shadows. Once they were clear of town, Nathan led them to a sheltered spot near a creek, hidden by cottonwood trees. They made a cold camp, not wanting to risk a fire that might give away their position. As they sat in the darkness, Victoria found herself watching Nathan. He had been so steadfast, so reliable through all of this. She barely knew him, and yet she trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in years. There was something about him, a quiet strength and decency that drew her. "Why did you never remarry?" she asked softly, then immediately regretted it. "I am sorry, that is too personal. You do not have to answer." But Nathan did not seem offended. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I loved my wife very much. When she died, I thought I would never feel anything again. For a long time, I was just numb, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Work helped. Building up the ranch, taking care of the herd, it gave me something to focus on. But as for remarrying," he shrugged. "I suppose I have not met anyone who made me want to try again." Until he trailed off and Victoria's heart skipped a beat. Until Nathan looked at her, his eyes shadowed in the darkness. Until now, maybe, you are. Different Victoria, strong and brave and determined. I admire that. Victoria felt warmth spread through her chest. I am none of those things. I am just doing what I have to do to survive. That is what strength is, Nathan said. Doing what needs to be done even when you are afraid. You could have given up at any point, but you did not. You kept fighting. That takes courage. They sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of crickets and the creek surrounding them. Victoria felt something shifting between them, something unspoken but real. She found herself wanting to move closer to Nathan, to feel the safety and warmth of his presence. But she held back, uncertain. Nathan seemed to sense her thoughts. He reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and rough against hers. Whatever happens, we will face it together. I promise you that. Victoria squeezed his hand, feeling tears prick her eyes. She had been alone for so long, fighting her own battles, that having someone stand beside her felt almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered. They stayed like that for a long time, hands clasped, until exhaustion claimed them both and they slept. The next day passed slowly. They stayed hidden in their camp, taking turns keeping watch. Nathan shot a rabbit mid-morning and they risked a small fire to cook it, the meat a welcome change from the dried beef they had been eating. As evening approached, they prepared to return to town. Victoria checked her rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready, though she hoped desperately that she would not need to use it. Nathan did the same, his movements practiced and efficient. "Ready?" he asked, and Victoria nodded. They rode into Santa Rosa under cover of darkness once again, making their way to Gerald's house. He was waiting for them, and his face was grave when he opened the door. "I have news," he said without preamble. "Some good, some bad. The good news is that Jack Reynolds responded to my wire. He is willing to come back and testify, and he has information that could be damaging to Maddox. Apparently, he witnessed Maddox ordering another man beaten nearly to death over a debt. He left town because he was afraid he would be next." "That is good," Nathan said. "And the bad news?" "The bad news is that Maddox knows you are helping Victoria. His men have been asking around town about you, Nathan. And I heard from Tom at the general store that Maddox has put out word that he is offering a reward for information on Victoria's whereabouts. $500. Victoria's stomach dropped. $500 was a fortune. For that much money, people would turn on their own mothers. "We need to get out of town," she said. "Wait," Gerald said. "There is more. I spoke to Emma Sutton, Robert's sister. She wants to talk to you, but she is too afraid to be seen with you in town. She said she will meet you at the old mission ruins north of town tomorrow at noon. She claims she has proof that Maddox was involved in her brother's disappearance." Nathan and Victoria exchanged glances. "It could be a trap," Nathan said slowly. "I do not think so," Gerald replied. "Emma is genuinely desperate to find out what happened to her brother, but you should be careful nonetheless." They thanked Gerald and left, once again slipping through the dark streets. As they passed the saloon, Victoria heard the sound of men's voices and laughter. She glanced through the window and froze. Curtis Maddox was inside, sitting at a table with several other men, a glass of whiskey in front of him. Nathan pulled her away quickly. "Do not let him see you." They made it back to their camp without incident, but the encounter left Victoria shaken. Maddox was so close, continuing his life as though he had not murdered a man, as though Victoria were not out there somewhere, running for her life. "We will get him," Nathan said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "We will make him pay for what he did." The next day they approached the old mission ruins carefully, arriving well before noon to scout the area. The mission had been abandoned for decades, its adobe walls crumbling, the roof long since collapsed. It stood on a small rise overlooking the surrounding plains, offering a good view of anyone approaching. Nathan positioned himself where he could watch the road while Victoria waited among the ruins. Noon came and went. Victoria began to worry that Emma Sutton had changed her mind or been prevented from coming. Then, just after 12:30, a woman appeared on the road, walking alone. She was in her mid-30s, thin and careworn, dressed in a faded calico dress. She looked around nervously as she approached the ruins. Victoria stepped out where she could be seen. "Emma Sutton," the woman nodded, her eyes wide and frightened. "Are you Victoria Vincent?" "I am." "Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you." Emma clutched a small bundle to her chest. "Gerald said you might be able to help me find out what happened to my brother. He said you saw Curtis Maddox kill a man." "I did," Victoria confirmed quietly. "I am sorry for your loss." "Gerald said you believe Maddox was involved in your brother's disappearance." "I know he was," Emma said fiercely. "Robert told me he had found something, some evidence of Maddox's illegal dealings. He was keeping a ledger, documenting everything. He said he was going to take it to the territorial marshal. 2 days later, he disappeared." She thrust the bundle toward Victoria. "I found this hidden in his room after he vanished. It is the ledger. Everything is in there, records of bribes, intimidation, smuggling. And on the last page, Robert wrote that he believed Maddox had killed a freighter named William Hobbs the year before, made it look like an accident." Victoria took the ledger with shaking hands. This was it. This was the evidence they needed. "Emma, this is incredibly brave of you. But testifying against Maddox will be dangerous." "I do not care," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "My brother is dead. I know it in my heart. Someone needs to pay for that. Someone needs to stand up to that monster." Nathan had approached silently during their conversation. "Miss Sutton, I give you my word that we will do everything in our power to protect you and to make sure this evidence reaches the right people." Emma looked at him, then at Victoria. "I trust you. Both of you, just, please, get justice for Robert and for all the others Maddox has hurt." "We will," Victoria promised. Emma left the way she had come, hurrying away as though afraid she might change her mind. Victoria and Nathan retreated into the ruins to examine the ledger. Page after page of careful notes, dates, names, amounts. It was damning, far beyond what they had hoped for. "This changes everything," Nathan said, his voice filled with something like awe. "With this and the testimony of Emma, Jack Reynolds, and you, there is no way Maddox can talk his way out of it. Even his connections would not save him." "We need to get this to Santa Fe," Victoria said. "As soon as possible. The longer we wait, the more chance Maddox has of finding out what we have." Nathan nodded. "We will leave tonight. It is 4 days to Santa Fe, but we can make it in 3 if we push hard. We just need to." He stopped abruptly, his eyes going to something over Victoria's shoulder. She turned and felt her blood run cold. Curtis Maddox stood at the edge of the ruins, a gun in his hand. Behind him were 4 of his men, all armed. They must have been following Emma, or perhaps someone had betrayed them after all. "Well, well," Maddox said, his voice smooth and cold. "Looks like the little bird has been busy. I will take that ledger, Miss Vincent." Nathan moved to put himself between Victoria and Maddox, his hand going to his gun. "That is not going to happen, Maddox." Maddox's eyes narrowed. "You are a fool, Harper. You could have stayed out of this, stayed safe on your ranch. Now you are going to die alongside her." "I do not think so," Nathan said calmly, though Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders. "You shoot us here in broad daylight and you will never be able to explain it away. Too many people know we have evidence against you. Too many people are asking questions." Who is going to ask questions about two people who were trespassing on abandoned property? Maddox countered. My men and I were just passing by when we saw suspicious activity. We called out and you drew on us. We had to defend ourselves. It is tragic, really. You will never get away with this, Victoria said, her voice steadier than she felt. Even if you kill us, the evidence will come out. Emma Sutton knows what we have. Gerald Murphy knows. Others know. You cannot kill everyone. Maddox's face darkened. I can try. Everything happened at once. Nathan drew his gun with shocking speed, firing as Maddox's men reached for their weapons. Victoria dove for cover behind a crumbling wall, clutching the ledger to her chest. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the confined space of the ruins. Nathan was moving, rolling behind cover, firing with practiced precision. One of Maddox's men went down, then another, but there were too many of them. Nathan grunted as a bullet grazed his shoulder, blood blooming on his shirt. Victoria grabbed her rifle and fired at one of the men advancing on Nathan's position. The shot went wide, but it made the man duck back. She fired again, this time hitting him in the leg. He went down with a cry. Maddox was shouting orders, trying to circle around to flank them. Nathan fired twice more and another man fell. That left only Maddox and one other man standing. It is over, Maddox, Nathan called out. Surrender, and maybe you will live long enough to stand trial. Maddox's response was to fire wildly in their direction. The bullet struck the wall near Victoria's head, sending adobe chips flying. She flinched back, then steadied herself and aimed carefully. This time, her shot hit Maddox's remaining man square in the chest. He collapsed without a sound. Now it was just Maddox, alone, his gun empty. He fumbled to reload, but Nathan was already on his feet, his gun trained on Maddox's chest. Drop it, Nathan ordered. For a moment, it looked like Maddox might try something stupid. Then his shoulders sagged, and he let the gun fall from his hands. You have won, he said bitterly. Are you happy? No, Victoria said, emerging from cover. I am not happy. A man is dead, maybe more than one. Nothing about this makes me happy, but at least justice will be served. They bound Maddox with rope from Nathan's saddle, securing his hands tightly. Nathan's shoulder was bleeding freely, but when Victoria tried to examine it, he waved her off. It is just a graze. We need to get moving before more of his men show up. They loaded Maddox onto Nathan's horse and walked back towards Santa Rosa, leading the horse between them. When they reached town, people came out of their homes and businesses to stare. The sight of Curtis Maddox bound and bloodied, being led through the streets by a rancher and a woman, was too remarkable to ignore. Sheriff Coleman came storming out of his office, his face red with anger. What is the meaning of this? Harper, you have no right to. I have every right, Nathan said coldly. This man is a murderer and a criminal. I caught him trying to kill Miss Vincent and myself. He is going to Santa Fe to face the territorial marshal, and if you try to stop me, I will assume you are complicit in his crimes. The sheriff sputtered, but the crowd that had gathered was watching, and some of them were muttering. Nathan had gambled that the sheriff would not dare to intervene with so many witnesses, and his gamble paid off. Coleman backed down, though his eyes promised retribution later. Gerald Murphy emerged from the telegraph office and hurried over. I will wire the territorial marshal and let him know you are coming. He will have men waiting to take custody when you arrive. Thank you, Victoria said gratefully. They did not linger in Santa Rosa. With Maddox secured, they gathered supplies and started the journey to Santa Fe. It was a hard 3 days, riding long hours, stopping only when they had to. Nathan's shoulder pained him, though he tried to hide it, and Victoria redressed it each night, trying to keep it clean. Maddox alternated between sullen silence and bitter threats. They ignored him for the most part, though Nathan kept a careful watch. A desperate man was dangerous, bound or not. On the afternoon of the third day, they reached Santa Fe. The territorial marshal, a stern man named William Garrett, was waiting with 2 deputies. He took custody of Maddox immediately and listened carefully as Victoria and Nathan told their story, presenting the ledger and explaining about the other witnesses. "This is solid evidence," Garrett said, flipping through the pages. "With this and your testimonies, we can make a strong case. Maddox will hang for this, and anyone who helped him will face justice as well." He looked at Victoria with respect. "You are a brave woman, Miss Vincent. Most people would have run and kept running. You stood and fought." "I could not have done it without Nathan," Victoria said, glancing at him. "He saved my life and helped me see this through." Garrett nodded. "You are both to be commended. Now, you will need to stay in Santa Fe for a few weeks, at least until the trial. The territorial government will cover your expenses, and I will make sure you are protected until this is resolved." They found lodgings at a respectable boarding house, and for the first time in over a week, Victoria felt like she could breathe. It was not over yet, but the worst was behind them. Maddox was in custody, the evidence was in the right hands, and justice would be served. That evening, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sunset, Nathan reached over and took Victoria's hand. It had become a familiar gesture, comforting and right. "What will you do after the trial?" he asked quietly. Victoria had been thinking about that very question. "I am not sure. I cannot go back to Santa Rosa, not after all this. Maybe I will find work here in Santa Fe, start fresh." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You could come back to the ranch with me if you wanted." Victoria's heart skipped. "As what?" "As whatever you want," Nathan said, turning to face her. "I know we have not known each other long, but these past days I have felt more alive than I have in years. You make me want to live again, not just exist. He paused, seeming to search for words. "I am falling in love with you, Victoria. I know it is fast, and I know we have been through hell together, and maybe that is clouding my judgment, but I do not think so. I think you are the bravest, strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I do not want to let you go." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not want to admit it because it seems crazy, but it is true. When I am with you, I feel safe and valued and seen in a way I never have before. You are." She struggled to find the words. "You are everything I never knew I needed." Nathan leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, but she did not. She met him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was a first kiss, tentative and exploring, but underneath was a current of deep feeling, of connection that went beyond words. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "So, is that a yes?" Nathan asked. "You will come back to the ranch with me?" "Yes," Victoria said, and kissed him again. The trial took 3 weeks. Jack Reynolds arrived from Albuquerque and testified about the beating he had witnessed. Emma Sutton testified about her brother's disappearance and the ledger. Victoria gave her testimony about the murder she had witnessed. The ledger itself was damning, each page another nail in Maddox's coffin. The defense tried to discredit the witnesses, suggested that the ledger was forged, that Victoria was a hysterical woman who could not be trusted. But the evidence was too strong, the testimonies too consistent. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts: murder, conspiracy, smuggling, and corruption. Curtis Maddox was sentenced to hang, and several of his associates, including Sheriff Coleman, were arrested and charged as accessories. It was a stunning victory for justice, and the territorial newspapers covered the story extensively, praising the bravery of the witnesses and the thoroughness of Marshall Garrett's investigation. When it was finally over, Victoria and Nathan returned to the ranch. Victoria had packed up her few remaining belongings from Santa Rosa, and as they rode up to the house, she felt a sense of coming home. Over the following months, they built a life together. Nathan formally proposed one evening as they sat watching the sunset from the porch, and Victoria accepted without hesitation. They were married in a small ceremony in Santa Rosa, with Gerald Murphy and Emma Sutton as witnesses. Victoria thrived at the ranch. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping with the cattle, keeping the books, making the house feel like a home in a way it had not since Nathan's first wife died. She was not replacing anyone. She was creating something new, something that was uniquely theirs. Nathan, for his part, seemed to bloom with Victoria in his life. The quiet sadness that had haunted him lifted, replaced by genuine happiness. He laughed more, smiled more, and found joy in the simple things. Waking up next to Victoria, working side by side during the day, falling asleep with her in his arms at night. A year after they married, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. Nathan was overjoyed, though also nervous, old fears about loss creeping in. But Victoria was strong and healthy, and when their son was born on a cool autumn morning, Nathan held him with tears streaming down his face. They named him Robert, after Emma Sutton's brother, a way of honoring the man whose evidence had helped bring Maddox to justice. Little Robert had his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's dark hair, and he was the light of their lives. 2 years later, a daughter came along whom they named Grace. She was a firecracker from the start, fearless and curious, keeping her parents on their toes. Nathan had to expand the house to accommodate their growing family, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Emma Sutton became a frequent visitor, a beloved aunt to the children. She had finally found peace after her brother's death, knowing that he had not died in vain, that his evidence had helped stop a monster. She eventually met and married a kind merchant, and their families became close friends. Jack Reynolds also stayed in touch, writing letters from Albuquerque where he had built a good life for himself, no longer looking over his shoulder in fear. He visited once a year, bringing gifts for the children and stories of his adventures. As the years passed, Victoria sometimes found herself thinking back to that desperate flight across the New Mexico territory, to the moment she had been caught in Nathan's fence, certain she was about to die. If someone had told her then that she would find not just safety but love, a family and a home, she would not have believed them. But life had a way of surprising you. Out of terror and desperation had come something beautiful and lasting. She had been running for her life, and instead, she had found her life waiting for her, in the form of a lonely rancher who had chosen to cut her free rather than turn away. Nathan often said that she had saved him as much as he had saved her, that finding her had given him a reason to live again. But Victoria knew the truth. They had saved each other one evening when the children were tucked in bed and the house was quiet. Victoria and Nathan sat on their porch, watching the stars come out. It was their favorite time of day, a peaceful moment to simply be together. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked softly. "Taking me in that day, your life would have been simpler if you had just ridden on by." Nathan looked at her, his eyes warm in the lamplight from the house. "Simpler, maybe, but not better, not even close. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria Harper. You and our children. I would not change a single moment." Victoria leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. "I feel the same way. Even with everything we went through, I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the occasional lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the grass. It was a good life they had built, honest and full of love. Inside the house, they heard one of the children cry out, probably from a dream. Victoria started to rise, but Nathan was already on his feet. "I will go. You stay here and enjoy the peace." She watched him go inside, heard his gentle voice soothing whichever child had called out. A few minutes later, he returned and settled back beside her. "It was Grace," he reported. "Bad dream about a coyote getting the chickens. I assured her that the chickens are safely locked up and that the coyotes know better than to mess with our ranch." Victoria laughed softly. "Our daughter has quite the imagination. She gets it from her mother," Nathan said with a grin. "The brave woman who outran outlaws and helped bring down a criminal empire." "I did not do it alone," Victoria reminded him. "I had a pretty remarkable rancher backing me up." "We made a good team," Nathan agreed. "We still do." As they sat there under the vast New Mexico sky, Victoria reflected on how much her life had changed. She had been a seamstress in a small town, alone and vulnerable, with no prospects and no family. Now she was a wife, a mother, a rancher's partner, surrounded by people who loved her and a life full of purpose and meaning. The scars on her arm from the barbed wire had faded to thin white lines, barely visible now. But she never regretted them. They were a reminder of the day her life had changed, the day she had been caught in a fence, and a good man had chosen to help her. Nathan had been her shield when she needed protection, her partner when she needed support, and her love when she needed a reason to believe in the future. And she had given him the same in return, helping him heal from old wounds and find joy again. Their story was not a simple one. It had been born of violence and fear, of desperate flight and dangerous choices. But from those dark beginnings had grown something bright and strong, a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it. Years continued to pass, marking their lives with the steady rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Robert grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the cattle. Grace became the heart of the household, her laughter filling every corner of the house. They had one more child, another son they named Matthew, who arrived when Victoria was 32 and Nathan was 38. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Victoria proved to have a head for business, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to increase their profits without overextending. Nathan focused on improving the herd and expanding their land holdings. Together, they built something substantial, a legacy for their children. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Victoria back to the spot where they had first met, where she had been caught in his fence. He had erected a small marker there, a simple wooden post with their initials carved into it. "This is where my life truly began," he said, holding her hand as they stood together. "This is where I found you." "This is where we found each other," Victoria corrected gently. "I was lost and you were hiding from life. We both needed saving." Nathan pulled her close, kissing her with the easy familiarity of a decade together. "Happy anniversary, my love." "Happy anniversary," Victoria echoed, looking out over the land that had become her home, the life she had never imagined but could no longer imagine living without. As they rode back to the house, where their children were waiting with Emma and Gerald and their families for a celebration dinner, Victoria felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had taken her through darkness to bring her to this light. She had been hunted and afraid, but she had never given up. And in the end, that courage had been rewarded beyond her wildest dreams. That night, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Victoria and Nathan lay in bed together, talking quietly in the darkness as they often did. "You think the children understand how lucky we are?" Victoria asked. To have found each other, to have built this life. They will, Nathan said confidently. Maybe not now while they are young, but someday when they are older and understand how rare it is to find true love, they will appreciate it. We will make sure of it by setting a good example. We have done that, Victoria agreed. We have shown them what it means to stand up for what is right, to face fear, and to love completely. That is a good legacy. Nathan turned on his side to face her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. You are my legacy, Victoria. You and our children. Everything good in my life traces back to the day I found you caught in my fence and made the choice to help rather than ride on by. That choice changed everything. It changed everything for me too, Victoria whispered. You gave me more than safety. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the life they had built together. Outside, the New Mexico night stretched vast and peaceful over the ranch, over the land where a desperate woman had once run for her life and found instead the love of her life. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to thrive, and the children grew strong and healthy. Robert eventually took over much of the day-to-day ranch operations, showing a natural aptitude for animal husbandry. Grace surprised everyone by developing an interest in law, inspired by the stories of her parents' fight for justice. She eventually went to study in Santa Fe, becoming one of the few female lawyers in the territory, and later the state when New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912. Matthew, the youngest, inherited his mother's head for business and his father's way with horses. He expanded the ranch's operations to include horse breeding, developing a reputation for quality stock that spread across the Southwest. Nathan and Victoria aged together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. When Nathan's hair turned gray, Victoria teased him that he looked distinguished. When Victoria's face showed the lines of years spent smiling and living, Nathan told her she had never been more beautiful. They celebrated their silver anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends. Gerald Murphy, now quite elderly, gave a touching speech about the day Nathan and Victoria had come to him for help, how he had known immediately that they were meant for each other. I have seen a lot in my years running the telegraph office, Gerald said, his voice wavering but strong. I have transmitted messages of joy and sorrow, birth and death, love and loss. But I have never seen two people more perfectly suited for each other than Nathan and Victoria Harper. They fought for justice together, built a life together, and have shown us all what true partnership looks like. Here is to another 25 years. The gathering raised their glasses in agreement, and Victoria felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. Nathan pulled her close, whispering in her ear, I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is impossible, Victoria whispered back. I already love you as much as one human can love another. Then I guess we will just have to keep proving the impossible possible, Nathan replied with a grin. As they danced together later that evening, moving slowly to the music played by a small band they had hired for the occasion, Victoria rested her head against Nathan's chest and listened to his heartbeat. It was steady and strong, the same heartbeat she had listened to on countless nights over the past 25 years. It was the sound of home. The next morning, after the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Victoria and Nathan took their usual spot on the porch with their morning coffee. It was early autumn, Victoria's favorite time of year, when the heat of summer broke and the air turned crisp and clear. What are you thinking about? Nathan asked, noticing the contemplative look on her face. I am thinking about the girl I was, Victoria said slowly. Terrified and alone, running for her life. I wonder what she would think if she could see me now. She would be proud, Nathan said with certainty. She would see a woman who survived, who fought, who built something beautiful out of tragedy. She would see that her courage was not wasted. Our courage, Victoria corrected. You were just as brave, taking in a stranger, standing against Maddox, risking everything to help me. It never felt like a choice, Nathan admitted. From the moment I saw you caught in that fence, something in me knew you were important. I do not believe in destiny or fate necessarily, but I believe we were meant to find each other. Victoria turned to him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. I believe that too. Every horrible thing I went through led me to you. And I would endure it all again if I knew this was where I would end up. They kissed, a gentle, loving kiss that spoke of years together and years yet to come. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. You know, Nathan said thoughtfully, I have been thinking about writing down our story. Not for publication necessarily, but for the children and grandchildren, so they know where they come from, the courage it took to build this family. That is a wonderful idea, Victoria said warmly, though I think you should be honest about how scared I was. I do not want them thinking their grandmother was some fearless heroine. I want them to know that courage is being terrified but doing what needs to be done anyway. That is exactly the lesson to teach, Nathan agreed. And I will include how scared I was too. Scared of losing you, scared of caring about someone again after losing my first wife, scared that I was not enough to keep you safe. You were always enough, Victoria said firmly. More than enough. You were exactly what I needed. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise higher over their land. In the distance, they could see their cattle grazing, and beyond that, the fence line where it all began. That fence had been repaired and maintained countless times over the years, but Victoria always thought of it as special, the place where her new life had started. Life continued its steady march forward. The children married and had children of their own. The ranch was eventually divided between them, each taking a portion to manage. But the original house, the one Nathan had shared with Victoria for so many years, remained the heart of the family, the place where everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations. Nathan and Victoria remained active well into their later years, still riding out to check on the cattle, still working side by side. Their love was a constant, visible to everyone who knew them. They held hands without thinking about it, finished each other's sentences, and could communicate entire conversations with just a look. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a grand celebration. Friends and family came from across New Mexico and beyond. Emma Sutton, now quite elderly herself, made the journey with her children and grandchildren. Jack Reynolds sent a telegram of congratulations and well wishes. During the celebration, Grace stood up to make a speech. She was a successful lawyer now, confident and articulate, but her voice shook with emotion as she spoke about her parents. My mother and father taught us many things, Grace said, looking at Nathan and Victoria with shining eyes. They taught us the value of hard work, the importance of integrity, and the power of standing up for what is right. But most importantly, they taught us about love. Not the easy, fairy tale kind of love, but real love. The kind that weathers storms, that faces down danger, that chooses to stay even when leaving would be easier. They showed us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, one you make every single day. She raised her glass. To Nathan and Victoria Harper, the best parents and the finest example of love any of us could ask for. May we all be so fortunate as to find what you have found in each other. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Victoria was crying openly now, and Nathan's eyes were suspiciously bright. They stood together, acknowledging the love and respect of their family and friends, and Victoria felt like her heart might burst from sheer happiness. Later, when they were alone, Nathan took Victoria's hand and led her outside to their favorite spot on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars they had watched together for 40 years. "We did it," Nathan said softly. "We built a good life." "We did more than that," Victoria replied. "We built a legacy. Our children are good people, Nathan, strong and kind and brave. They will carry on what we started." "They learned from the best," Nathan said, pulling her close. They stood there together, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something lasting and beautiful. The scared seamstress and the lonely rancher were still there somewhere, deep inside them, but they had been transformed by love and time into something richer and deeper. Victoria thought back to that moment caught in the fence, the barbed wire tearing her skin, the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She remembered the terror, the certainty that she was about to die. And then Nathan had appeared, calm and capable, cutting her free and standing between her and danger. He had been her shield then, just as he had been her shield every day since. Not because she was weak or helpless, but because that was what love did. It protected and supported and stood firm. And she had been his shield too, helping him heal, giving him a reason to live fully again, standing beside him through good times and hard times. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful. A family, a legacy, a love story for the ages. As they went to bed that night, Victoria thought about how differently her life could have turned out if Nathan had chosen not to intervene. If she had given up during her desperate flight, if they had not been brave enough to trust in the feelings growing between them, but they had been brave. They had chosen each other, again and again, and that had made all the difference. Nathan fell asleep first, his breathing evening out, his arm still wrapped around Victoria. She lay awake a little longer, savoring the warmth and safety of his embrace, the peace of their home, the knowledge that they were surrounded by people who loved them. She had been caught in a fence, desperate and terrified. A lonely rancher had cut her free and become her shield. And together, they had built a life beyond anything either of them had dared to dream. It was, Victoria thought as she drifted off to sleep, the perfect ending. And the perfect beginning. The years that followed their 40th anniversary were gentle ones. Nathan and Victoria gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting their children to carry on the work. They spent their days reading, talking, taking slow rides across the land they loved and spoiling their grandchildren shamelessly. When Nathan was 70 and Victoria was 63, Nathan fell ill with pneumonia one hard winter. For weeks, Victoria nursed him, barely leaving his side. She bathed his fevered brow, coaxed him to eat, read to him during his lucid moments. The doctor warned the family to prepare for the worst, but Victoria refused to give up. "You are not leaving me," she told Nathan firmly one night when his breathing was labored and he seemed to be slipping away. "We have too much left to do together. I need you here with me." Nathan's eyes opened, cloudy with fever but focused on her face. "I would never leave you by choice," he whispered hoarsely. "You are my everything." "Then fight," Victoria urged, gripping his hand. "Fight to stay with me." And Nathan did fight. Slowly, painfully, he recovered. It took months before he was fully himself again, but Victoria was there every step of the way, encouraging him, supporting him, loving him. When Nathan was finally well enough to walk outside again, he and Victoria stood on their porch and looked out over the ranch. Nathan's hair was completely white now, and he moved more slowly, but his eyes were still the same gray-green that had captivated Victoria all those years ago. "Thank you," Nathan said quietly. "For what?" Victoria asked, "for not letting me go. For fighting for me the way I fought for you all those years ago." Victoria smiled, leaning against him. "That is what love is, Nathan. We fight for each other. Always." They lived several more good years together. Years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with quiet contentment and enduring love. They celebrated their 45th anniversary, then their 50th, a remarkable milestone that the whole family gathered to honor. On a warm spring evening when Nathan was 75 and Victoria was 68, they sat together on their porch as the sun set. It was a beautiful evening, the kind that made you grateful to be alive. They had spent the day with family, and now it was just the two of them, enjoying the peace. "I have had a good life," Nathan said suddenly, "better than I ever deserved." "You deserved every bit of happiness you got," Victoria replied firmly. "And I am not done with you yet, Nathan Harper. We have many more years together." Nathan smiled and took her hand. "I hope so." "I love you, Victoria. From the moment I saw you caught in that fence, I think I knew you were going to change my life. I just did not know how much." "I love you too," Victoria said, squeezing his hand. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me life, not just safety but real life, joy and purpose and love, everything that matters." They sat together as the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. They did not know how many more sunsets they would share, but they knew that whatever time they had left, they would face it together. That was the promise they had made all those years ago when a terrified woman had been caught in a fence, and a lonely rancher had chosen compassion over indifference. It was a promise they had kept through 47 years of marriage, through trials and triumphs, through fear and joy. They were each other's shield, each other's strength, each other's home. And that, they both knew, was the truest love of all. As the night deepened and the air grew cool, they went inside together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever tomorrow brought with the same courage and love that had carried them through everything else. Their story had begun with barbed wire and terror, with pursuit and danger. But it had become something beautiful, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and love. A lonely rancher had cut a desperate woman free, and in doing so had freed them both to find a love that would last a lifetime. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating. And for Nathan and Victoria Harper, it was the greatest gift life could have given them, each other.